My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
9 años pidiendo el snack wrap. Aquí tienes tu snack wrap. ¿Tú quieres un snack wrap? Toma tu snack wrap. ¿Tú también? Toma un snack wrap. Snack wrap, snack wrap, snack wrap. Volvió el snack wrap. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. In Caroline O'Donoghue's most recent novel, The Rachel Incident, the eponymous Rachel is finding her way as a young person in Cork, Ireland. She's a student of promise and an employee at a bookstore where she works with her best friend, James. She imagines a life in and of books, perhaps as a writer or in publishing. Her rather ordinary life is suddenly turned upside down when the embers of a crush for her charismatic professor, Fred Byrne, are doused when it is revealed that his affections are for James instead. Rachel finds herself in a complicated foursome in which she'll take a job with Fred's wife while helping to spin a web of lies and deception required for James and Fred to proceed with their affair. Told in a wholly original voice in waves of comedy and angst, The Rachel Incident dramatizes a moment of youthfulness in which transgressions against friends and those in our tiny social orbits ripple outward and change lives in unexpected and sometimes tragic, sometimes beautiful ways. A story of many kinds of desire, loves of every flavor develop, evolve, bloom, and die on the vine, making The Rachel Incident a very different sort of love story. With every turn of the labyrinth, we find that Caroline unsettles our commonplace assumptions, our gut judgments, and our prejudices and preconceptions. Both seated in a tradition of campus novels and fully distinct from that lineage, The Rachel Incident captivates precisely because it keeps you guessing while asking you to look back at your own youth, to find perhaps some tenderness in its foibles. Caroline O'Donoghue is an Irish author, journalist, and host of the award-winning podcast Sentimental Garbage. Her previous work includes a trilogy for young adults, the first of which, All Our Hidden Gifts, is under option to a major international indie, with Caroline adapting it for long-form TV drama. On publication of her first novel, Promising Young Women, she was shortlisted for the Irish Book Awards Newcomer of the Year and the Kate O'Brien Award. Her next adult novel, Scenes of a Graphic Nature, was published in 2020 and is in development as a feature. She has a regular column for the Irish Examiner. Caroline was born in Cork, but currently lives in London. Welcome to the show, Caroline.
Hi, Chris. What a thoughtful opening. Thank you.
I really am so glad to get to talk to you. And I'm looking at the cover of the Knopf edition of the book, and what a gorgeous, gorgeous painting. And I looked up the painter. He's an Israeli painter, and I wonder if you had any say in the wonderful painting that we see on the cover.
Do you know what? That's such an interesting question because I didn't select that painter. I hadn't heard of him before they found that image. And then when I did see his work, I reached out to see if I could buy his work, and it's far too expensive for me.
Yeah, I was wondering if you owned it.
Yeah, I was like, "Do you do it in a postcard?" I'm hoping that someday when Rachel gets made into TV, that I can, I'll be my art owning era. But it's interesting that you bring up the cover, and on your covers actually, because this was simultaneously brought out in the UK and the US, and on the UK cover, it's this sort of a photograph of a young woman with a sort of a fairish hair with her head turned away mostly from the camera. And in the US cover, it's a woman with sort of fairish reddy hair with her head turned away from the viewer. And in both cases, both sets of fans have reached out to me, or readers or friends living in other countries have reached out to me and said, "Is this you?" Like, either is this a photograph of you in the case of the English cover, or is this a painting of you, the US cover? And purely because I'm a woman with that sort of hair. But I think what they were really getting at is frequently with this book, more so than the five that have preceded it, I have been getting some version of the question, "Is this you?" Which I find it really interesting to get for the first time in your career so far in,
Yeah, because usually that's the first book thing, right?
Totally, totally. And I think I have really sidestepped that. First of all, because my first book was very much inspired by a kind of Angela Carter, Daphne du Maurier style of literature, where I was playing with the Gothic and the unreal. And so, because grown-ups are like, "Well, I don't believe in magic, so no place in truth." And then my second novel was told from the point of view of an English main character who is also a lesbian woman, and I'm demonstrably not an English or a lesbian, so I got off the hook with that. And then I had a trilogy for teenagers that once again was about magic, so I got off the hook with that. And now, because this is a book that is mimics my own autobiography in quite visible ways, and I don't mean to say that because I'm some famous person, but I find it increasingly interesting that we have this new way of reading novels whereby nobody's ever reading a novel without their phone 6 inches from them. And if I like a novel, for example, I just read Tom Lake by Anne Patchett, and I didn't really know very much about Anne Patchett, but suffice to say, I was Googling Anne Patchett the entire time to see what might map up. And it's interesting because The Rachel Incident is a novel where the most amount of details line up in a way that readers are therefore tempted to say, "Is this you?"
That's fascinating, and I hadn't thought of it precisely in the phone terms, but that's so right. We've got the phone there next to us while we're reading, whether we're good boys and girls or not, and and then we're Googling, we're finding details, and we're saying, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that she went to school there. Well, it must be that precise moment and that campus." But I also, as somebody who thinks a lot about contemporary literature, I always want to push that a little bit aside and allow fiction to exist in worlds that certainly can have details from one's life, but that in all sorts of ways destabilize that notion. Do you want that as a writer, or do you encourage this sort of like Google and map?
Absolutely. In that, like, I'm in your camp firmly, Chris, in that I sometimes can't believe how hard people find it to grasp that writers take details from the lived experience and then transport them into unreal experiences, and they're in this fiction. It's like, I can't believe every time a new novel comes out, like 12 times a week in every literary paper, we have to be like, it's so crazy to me that we have to keep relearning this lesson. And for me, it was a deliberate prank, and or device, whatever you want to call it. In that, I wanted to have this girl who, she mimics my autobiography in that we both grew up in the same place, we both emigrated at the same time, and we even have some sort of similar physicalities. But that you would be reading this novel that feels very much like, okay, this is someone going through a recession, struggling with love and friendship. It feels like a fictionalized memoir. And then you have this character doing these in many ways unconscionable things. And it gets very naughty and almost like a soap opera very quickly. And it's sort of like, what? I always read like, oh, did this happen to her?
I think they think writers are braver or something, that they would want out these extraordinary transgressions and terrible things they've done supposedly in their fiction. But I don't know many writers who love to have that sort of splashed out in the world, the worst moments in their lives.
So yeah, it feels like a I don't know, it's quite school marmish to be like, I'm teaching you all a lesson. Like, how dare you ask another female writer about her life? I'm going to use my life and then blow it up, and use the bare facts of my life and then create the most salacious soap opera you can dream of,
I mean, it's a needed lesson. So school marmish or not, I think fiction loses a little bit of its power if it's always just a mirror of autobiographical details.
Yeah, and it's also, I mean, as somebody who thinks a lot about these things, I'm sure you're in the same boat. Where I'm thinking like, okay, well, there's the cliche of like, okay, women, particularly young women, use their personal experience in order to write fiction. That wink, wink, we know it isn't fiction, kind of thing. And then it's like, okay, so then therefore we have to go out of our way to prove that we research or prove that we make it up. You can often, time and time again, when you see authors in interviews, and they're almost going out of their way to tell you how much they were in the New York Public Library learning about trains. Because they're so awkward about having even had a single lived experience that then became a chapter. The imagination is the most personal thing we have. It is completely made up of human experiences and emotions, and like, I don't know. It's a real bee in my bottle I get sometimes, and I realize it's completely circular arguments.
No, I agree with you entirely. I think it's somewhat of a misnomer to call the Rachel incident a campus novel, but that's somewhat the case with all campus novels, as they most often find their drama off campus. That's certainly the case here, where the city of Cork, the bookstore where James and Rachel work, and Fred Burns' apartment are the storehouses of a lot of the plot. But that said, it is a novel about students and professors, about a certain moment in our lives in which we're incredibly naive while feeling quite worldly. What's your take on the campus novel? Was that a tradition you had in mind when you were writing this? And how does the university itself play as a character or a space or a mood in the novel?
It's so fascinating that you say that about campus novels, because even when I think of them now, all of the great campus novels that I love, like Brideshead Revisited or The Secret History, have very little to do with the colleges themselves, even though even Brideshead is so famous for that Oxford vibe. But I feel like it's like maybe a fifth of the novel even happens at Oxford, and the rest is in memory. And I think what's interesting about campus novels, and as you say, all the great ones, they don't feature the campus that heavily. In Secret History, it's almost like that sort of that fake Bennington College or whatever it is. It's like the main character, it's like he thought he could come to a university to find some kind of either artistic or internal or social enlightenment. And then he turns to this group of people because of what he couldn't find there.
Right. Yeah. It's so disappointing, the actual campus, that the fervor of these students outside of the campus walls is what it seems to fulfill it, or promises and then fails to.
Yes, exactly. So I think all good campus novels are about the promise and the disappointment of what you think you're going to find at university versus what you don't find. And I think that's really interesting to me, because obviously if a true campus novel would be about going to classes and joining the drama society or whatever, and that's not interesting.
Although I will say a recent one that does spend a lot of time on campus, both it's two books actually, is Elif Batuman's The Idiot, followed by Either Or. I don't know if you've read those.
No, I haven't. I certainly own them. But I've been meaning to get some time.
They're really extraordinary. But she does just make the campus this, like, the omnipresent thing, and so perhaps that's the exception to the rule, really.
Yeah.
When I think about, American campus novels, first of all, there's just a billion of them right now, and they all stretch and twist the tradition in wonderful ways. But I wonder about, because campus life is very different in Europe and in Ireland than it is in the US, where you tend to have these very residential campuses and everyone is living on the campus itself versus apartments around the place. And I wonder if you sense that lends a difference from US versions of the campus novel to ones perhaps in the Irish tradition or UK tradition writ large.
It's hard for me to say, because I think almost everyone you speak to about their university or campus experience, the first thing they say, and maybe it's just unique to my household and me and my husband, but it's everyone seems to say, oh, I wouldn't really know what the normal experience is because my experience was X kind of thing. And that's obviously everyone's personal experience is unique to them. But my personal experience of university was slightly unique, I guess, in that I grew up in this university town, which is Cork City. And it's unfair to call it a university town because I guess that implies that the only thing that's happening in the university, there's more, it's like the second biggest city in Ireland. It has kind of tech companies and things like that. But the university is a huge part of the city. And so when I was quite young, I would say 15 or 16, I had a lot of older siblings, and I was always borrowing fake IDs from somebody or somebody's girlfriend. And I sort of had a very active nightlife from quite a young age. And then by the time I got around to actually, so in between sort of my teens and time to go to university, the economy really crashed, and it made no sense for me to spend a lot of money to go to a university that was out of town when I could just live at home and go to university for quite a low price, really. And so what that sort of affected in me was I was 18 years old and attending university, and all these people who were coming to Cork from different places all around Ireland, and in some places, different places all over the world, and to have this exciting experience. And I sort of felt like a chewed up old whore next to them. I just felt like I've done it all. I've seen it all. And everything was just sort of so unexciting to me. And I was so bored and so sarcastic. And then I also had this experience where my English course was so huge. And this also mimics Rachel. So huge that it was impossible to kind of gain any purchase socially.
Yes, yeah.
And every time you would talk to somebody in a seminar, you suddenly wouldn't see them again, and then you would find out they had dropped out. And so I just found it, even though I'm a pretty social person, I found it really hard to do anything other than attend classes at university. So I would attend classes, and then I would leave and I would go work at my job, which was at a HMB, which I believe is like the UK and Irish equivalent of like a Virgin Megastore.
Okay, yeah.
And that was where my life happened, I feel, for those 3.5 years, where that was my Empire Records, where just people stood around and talked all day about books and music and really lit each other up. And then when I finally got around to writing the Rachel incident a year and a half ago, during COVID anyway, somebody said to me, I was having a similar conversation as like this about campus novels, and they were talking about, obviously Sally Rooney's Normal People and Maeve Binchy's Circle of Friends, and about how there had never been a Cork campus novel and what that would look like.
I was thinking they were all Dublin ones.
Yeah. And that got me really excited, the idea of like what a Cork campus novel would look like. And then I remember saying to that person, I was like, well, it wouldn't, if I were to do something like that, all of it would take place in the person's part-time job. And that's what ends up happening with the Rachel incident.
Yeah, and it really does, it separates it from a lot of the campus novels I've read recently. And I did find that fascinating that it takes place in Cork when so much of the Irish scene seems to be dominated by Dublin and even Trinity in particular. But that idea of Rachel finding, a social life, a intellectual life, a cultural life in her part-time job, and also how the economic recession is is making her wonder, what is the value of this education that she's getting? Is there going to be a job, or is it just that you have to leave Ireland no matter what? And that the way in which the recession creeps into the bookstore and its possible demise, it's there everywhere. It has its tendrils in all parts of the plot. And it seems assuredly that you wanted to make clear that moment, that everyone had that on their minds all the time. Can you talk about the economic straits and how it just involves itself everywhere?
It's so fascinating. I wonder if you're like this, Chris, where if you have a set of memories, but you don't have anybody to talk about those memories with, the memories simply fade. Like for me, memories are always activated, animated, and embroidered by chatting about them.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and because I moved here 12 years ago, I very much because of the recession. So I moved in 2011, and I moved to London. And yes, there was certainly a backsplash of the recession happening in that graduate jobs were impossible to get and the cost of living was very difficult. But on the whole, people were getting by the way London always gets by. And then I, made my crowd of London-centric friends, and all of them were either from other countries or from other places in the UK. And nobody had quite had the experience of the economic recession the way that we had in Ireland, where it was so concentrated and so shocking. And I think a large part of that is to do with the fact that the kind of the emergent middle class in Ireland is quite a unique thing, in that like it was such a poverty stricken, not even poverty stricken because that makes it sound like it was sudden, more of a poverty soaked country for so long, for decades. And then in the early 90s, things just turned around, and there was this sort of class of new money that was so exciting and very much the world I was born into. And pretty much everybody I knew had money in some way. Like even people who they didn't live in an amazing neighborhood, but they still went on 2 holidays a year and had, great stuff on their birthdays. And then in 2008, it all changed so suddenly. Like I went to give you sort of an example of it, I went to like a very lovely girls' private school in the middle of Cork City. And when I was at the beginning of sort of my, I guess in Ireland, in America, you'd call it your sophomore year.
Second year of high school, or?
Okay, no, the second to last year.
Oh, okay. Is junior.
Oh, great. So when I was in my junior year, this feels very exotic.
Which makes no sense, but
no, it makes no
go
sense.
with it.
So glad to understand that now. So many teen movies will make sense to me now, but before. When I was in my junior year, my year had maybe 160 pupils. And by my senior year, there was, I think, 40 pupils left in my year, because everybody had left.
Gosh, wow.
Because their parents could no longer afford the fees, and or maybe there was other reasons, but that's certainly that was certainly how the numbers shook down. And so, yeah, I just don't think that many places were struck in such a dramatic way. And so for many years, I almost, before lots of people from my childhood started emigrating over as well, I had no one really to talk to about this stuff. And so I just sort of forgot it happened. And then during COVID, my friend Ryan, who was kind of part of the inspiration for the character of James in the book, he was living close to me. We both bought bicycles the way everyone bought bicycles. And we started going on like walks and bike rides together. And we would just talk about what it was like back then. And all of these memories sort of came flooding back and just became embroidered by conversation. And it just felt like, when you're a writer and you realize that you have a unique perspective on something and that your life experience wasn't necessarily wasted and it could have value or insight, you want to pin that down as quickly as possible,
That's really interesting, that idea about memory as something that if it's not shared, it disappears. I certainly find that true in my own life, but I think it's interesting how then a novel, either through discussions you're having in real life or discussions you're sort of having against the sounding board of the novel itself, brings those memories into existence. And it seems like that happened here. It's the case with many campus novels that they delight in recounting the bad behavior of male professors with most often female students. It's almost omnipresent, not always, but almost.
Yeah.
You play a wonderful sleight of hand by making us think that Rachel's crush on her larger-than-life professor, Fred Byrne, is going to go in that direction. And then you sort of pull the rug out from underneath of us. And we find that the questionable behavior is, in fact, with James breaking that paradigm. There is a double transgression there that adds new life to this very old story of power dynamics. What was interesting to you about changing that paradigm?
I find it really fascinating in general to have maybe this will be something I realize the further I get into this. I really like pranking the audience or the reader. For example, my first novel, Promising Young Women, it was very important to me that it opened as if it were a Bridget Jones diary or maybe a Nick Hornby novel or a Marion Keyes novel, which I'm a fan of all those things hugely. But then that it would slowly become this kind of sort of an Angela Carter thing or a Daphne du Maurier that were just felt like gothic and unreal, and how fun that is when a reader is expecting that they're treading down a very well-trodden path, and then they realize that there's all these spooky, scary trees have grown up around that path. And with this, it was like taking this extremely expected and quite boring trope at this point. And I think for me, part of exploding that very boring trope was, I'm sorry, that's mean, boring. I mean, lots of people do very exciting things with it, but you know what I mean?
It can be boring. I mean, it can feel overdone.
Overdone, yeah. And I guess it's overdone because it's a common story, and yeah, that's not great for society, but
No.
But I suppose in the post kind of Me Too era, and my first novel really dealt with that a lot. It was very, very strange in that I wrote it in 2016. It came out in 2018 as the Me Too movement was happening, and it was very much a response to sort of sexual power dynamics in workplaces. So it was a very strange moment to be in the middle of. My predominant emotion was rage, and I think I also worked for like a feminist website, and I was in my late 20s, and I just felt this coursing rage all the time at what women were forced to go through, and also rage that the things that I found attractive were also the things that were looking to destroy me. And for that, I don't mean specifically men. I mean men seeming powerful or being domineering, or all these things that I knew were red flag behavior, in that they often led to more exploitative things, but I was also attracted to, and how annoying that is. and I felt like I had a very even though I've been with my partner for 10 years, this kind of callous grew up and around me vis-a-vis male behavior in general and men in general, which I still love my brothers and my friends and my boyfriend, but I just felt really impatient with all of it. And as time has moved on from that moment, that impatience has worn away. And I guess I'm more interested in, like, Dr. Byrne is a very shady character in that he is sort of risked it all just to drink from the fountain of youth. He's deeply cowardly. He's incredibly selfish, but I also feel like such tenderness for that character and the things that he's a victim of and why he does the things he does. And I just feel a real softness for him. And there's parts of the novel where Rachel, she breaks off from recounting this man's things that he did to her and to her friend, and she just starts crying because she can't believe how lovely he was in some moments. And that was a part I wanted to really dig into that. And these things are painful because we love these people, you know?
Yeah.
I guess that was why I wanted to. It wasn't just out of a prank instinct to really piss off the reader or to wrongfoot the reader. It was also very much or how do we keep loving people who wrong us? And all, you know, I guess.
And I feel like novels are so much better equipped to give people nuance, even who are craven and make bad decisions, and yet the way a narrative can texture that, can give moments of beauty and goodness to someone who seems like they don't deserve it in a moment when I feel like all of our other forms of media digestion of news pillory no matter what, and there is no gray area, and there is no room for someone being both things, both having done horrible wrongs and having human qualities of goodness about them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that those people don't deserve some of the pillory that happens, but at the same time, the novel reminds us about a kind of universal humanity.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. It's interesting because I was this is kind of a different subject, but hopefully it leaks back. I don't know how much this Russell Brand conversation has been hitting the US.
Yeah, a little bit. I've just been following it a touch with the BBC dropping him and everything.
Yes, and so obviously it's hideous, and even more obviously, every single person I know in London knew about it for years. And
gosh, why isn't that always the way?
It's always the way, always. Like I remember being at a Christmas party 2 years ago, and somebody was telling me about an experience they had with him that was just the most devastating thing you'd ever heard. But how I've noticed in the coverage of it, there was this interesting the way because obviously nobody has footage of these terrible things that he did. They use the stand-up and the bits on the BBC shows he's done or panel shows he's done to illustrate the monster that he is, and using sort of like very problematic bits of speech or whatever. And I'm not saying that those things aren't evidence of what a monster he was, but what those clips taken out of context are suggesting is, and we all went along with it, and look at all the audience laughing and smiling, and we're he's a monster, but aren't we monsters too? Aren't the villagers holding the torches as bad as Frankenstein himself? Kind of, that's the sort of message we're supposed to get from that. And it's interesting because having lived through that moment firsthand, I was like, well, yes, people are laughing at as he made these jokes, but I think they're missing the context of that particular moment, which was kind of the early noughties, of when like it was there. We had just come off such a toxic time it's always toxic time for women, but a toxic time for women in the media, where it was like, circle of shame, like circle the woman's cellulite in the magazine, who's gained weight, who's lost weight. Like it was a really horrible Britney Spears with crotch shots. I actually talk about this in the novel quite a bit, and all this sort of Paris Hilton sex tapes and stuff. And what was appealing about the Russell Brand thing in that moment was like, well, here's this guy, and he loves sort of the sort of like the raw, rutting mammalery of us all just like sweating and fucking in the mud. And there was something exciting about that in the moment, of this guy just kind of like strolling out onto the BBC and being like, women, you can be as gross as you want. I'll fuck you. I'll fuck all of you, And it was so interesting that like in that moment, that felt really rebellious and really interesting. And I remember being interested in it. It's just amazing how the framing of these things change as you get older. And it's tempting to boo at the people in that audience who are cheering, but you kind of also have to understand where they're coming from,
Yeah, that's really nice contextualization, and helps me understand a little bit better why he was so popular in that moment.
Yeah, and he was everywhere. It was ridiculous. Yeah, it was an omnipresence over here. Sorry, this is not a local fan podcast. It's just on my mind a lot this week.
I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, So all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast Gems.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there's one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
No, of course, and these are fundamental questions in the Rachel incident. So they parallel.
Yeah.
This is a novel that's so much about voice. Rachel's cleverness, her wit, her observational powers make this narrative feel fresh and new. I wonder how the nature of its backward-looking perspective, Rachel's recollection of this peaked time in her youth, made that voice an interesting challenge to you. She both has to carry the wisdom of having lived through it all and come out on the other end, while viewing it in recollections with something like a youthful naivete. What kind of hurdles did you encounter in trying to thread that needle? And did you find Rachel's voice immediately, or did it take you some time to grow into it and wear it properly?
Yeah, it was so funny. She came to me immediately. It was lovely. It was really lovely. And I think it had a lot to do with the novels that I was reading, rereading actually. I had that thing during COVID where, everything that I read that was new felt too difficult. So I kept coming back to sort of old classics. And the 2 books that I reread during that time were, one of them is Brother of the More Famous Jack by Barbara Trapido. And the other was Les Divorces by Diane Johnson.
I haven't thought about that in years.
Oh my God, you should reread it. It's so good. It's so good. But both of those also, they're different people, but they're of a similar age, I think. They're both in their late 70s or 80s now. And they write about young womanhood in a past tense perspective. And the I is always this kind of very forward looking, sort of jolly narrative of well, gosh, I was going around Paris and I was wearing a miniskirt and men were saying horrible things to me, but Jesus, it was exciting to be alive, kind of thing. And sometimes terrible things happen to them. And there's some devastating moments in Les Divorces that really rip your heart out. But it really got to me how it was really coming from the perspective of somebody who I knew turned out fine by the end of it. And that was the secret to finding Rachel. It really struck me that I had read a couple of books in a row where it was very young women going through their lives, whether it's their struggles with men or class or money or whatever. And because they were lived day to day, they felt grim, and I remember my very early 20s, particularly just after I moved to London, it felt really grim, never having enough money and always feeling unsure, and how anxious I was all the time, and how I was conscious of people, making fun of my accent or whatever, and that's as much as it is thrilling to say poor me, it's also so boring to hear about it on a day-to-day level, where it's well, I went to a meeting again and the MD did an Irish accent and it was embarrassing and strange. And it's well, at the end of the day, Caroline, who cares? Do you know what I mean? I couldn't keep on stomaching this vibe of present tense atrocities that aren't that bad. Because I was just wearied by reading a lot of stuff like that lately. And I thought maybe with a past tense, we could put a little levity on things that were genuinely quite bad.
There is a way in which that older self, Rachel, wants to both inhabit that younger self and embody it, so that she can understand those choices differently, because they I think, to the older Rachel, seem impossible that she made those decisions.
Yeah.
And I like that she wears almost that youth like a mask that she can play in again. And so it feels...
You know what? I was thumbing through it in preparation for this podcast. I haven't looked at it in a little while. I noticed that a recurring theme that comes up again and again, and I think it might just be laziness on my part rather than a trope, but it's her constantly talking about parallel worlds. She's like, oh, there's a world in which I said the right things to Carrie that day, and there's a world in which I did this and that. And it's kind of a constant refrain, and I think that's it's kind of it's a bit lazy as a writer, but it's also, when you're thinking about your own life, impossible not to implement, right? Of like thinking of all the other things that you could have done and how those worlds live in parallel in your mind. It's amazing how we get any present tense living done when we have all these parallel worlds just living in our heads.
It's true. The what if I had chosen path B is such a feature of our daydreaming life. Rachel's life and secrets that she keeps about Fred and James's ongoing affair ends up intertwining with her work and personal relationship with Fred's wife, Deanie, who she hopes will make connections for her in the publishing world. Deanie is smart, put together, and professionally accomplished, the very things that Rachel would like to be. But Rachel sees her as, quote, that clueless wife of my best friend's lover. It's a complicated mess of a relationship. How did it take shape for you in the creative process, and what did you hope would develop from this really kind of, at first it seems sort of tangential to the affair, and then it becomes central to everything that Rachel does and the choices she makes?
It's so interesting with her because she's with Deanie. I mean, it's like there's some, and I can't really explain it as a writer. And maybe it's one of those things that just can't be explained, and that's the magic of novels. But some people you kind of build from the ground up, or you take a bunch of people from your past and you glue them together. And like I often say that Rachel's boyfriend Carrie, he's like a combination of all the sort of men I've ever seriously been in love with. And that is a Frankenstein portrait, But with Deanie, she is just somebody who just walked in fully formed. And the first thing I knew about her is that she looks like Shelley Duvall in The Shining. Like she...
Oh, wow.
and like, like I kind of, definitely, like, I'm not saying that she goes insane or anything, but, there's kind of the all that black hair and those kind of unusual eyes and this kind of, this fragility, but great strength as well. And there's something that Rachel says about Deanie early on, which is that it was like she felt very confident about being shy. And she's one of the characters I'm proudest of, just because apart from Shelley Duvall, she's kind of based on nothing. And what I found so interesting about writing her was there's lots of people who do bad things in this novel. I think everybody does something unconscionable in this novel, really, in that Byrne, the way he treats James and therefore Rachel, and James sometimes the way he kind of continuously betrays Rachel, even though they're closer than family. But Deanie is someone who, her husband comes to her someday and says, I have this great student. She's really bright. She's really struggling. Will you give her an internship? And that's as far as Deanie knows about it.
Yeah.
And Deanie says, well, I can't really afford to do a thing like that, but sure, I can find 50 quid a week and she can do some of my inbox clearance. And then from there, Rachel proves herself to be highly competent, and herself and Deanie build this relationship, and she kind of really does become Deanie's assistant and works with her on further projects, but Deanie is never inclined to pay her more. And it's this interesting thing of like, she's exploiting Rachel the same way that, not the same way, but similarly to how her husband is exploiting James. And not to say that she's an evil character, because she's certainly not, but about how, I thought it was interesting about how you can think that you're helping someone and know that you're helping someone, but sometimes, and I guess I've experienced this a few times, when you become somebody's protege, and then when you outgrow the protege, role,
Mhm.
then it's kind of existentially disarming for them to acknowledge that, so they just don't. And then, and that's all that's Deanie's real sin, is that she just kind of won't acknowledge that things are changing around her.
Hmm. One of my favorite scenes in the novel is the dinner party that Rachel attends at Fred and Deanie's, during which she realizes that Deanie believes Fred is having an affair with her. It is a masterclass in discomfort. Not only is she given the terrible cold shoulder by most of the guests, and certainly Deanie, before she knows what really is going on, but she's never quite sure whether they're dismissing her because of the rumored affair or because she is professionally beneath them and not worth their time. Everything has a sickly bile hovering over it, including this sort of fish smell that's making Rachel feel horribly nauseous. It must have been fun and also devastating to write. And I wonder how you shaped it and how you wanted it to come off as an encapsulated scene.
I'm so glad that you brought it up. It is the scene that most people bring up as their sort of favorite scene, and I do think it's probably the best thing I've ever written. and I felt that way when I was writing it.
Oh, that's it. That rarely happens. That's amazing.
I know, and it's funny because you know, you can sort of mystery of the flow state thing, I suppose. Like, you can turn up to your work every day for 50 days in a row and just mulishly, pour out words into a document, most of which will go and get re-edited and reshaped for subsequent drafts. And but this was like, I think it was probably the only time I ever really experienced flow in a truthful way, where I was like, oh my God, it's just all happening. And
you were
like
Kobe Bryant on the page.
Oh my God. Yeah. The way I've been thinking about it was like, Miles Teller and Whiplash. This is the kind of,
oh
like,
my God.
seriously. But for, small dinner party scenes in Irish provincial novels. Yeah, and I think that it was a really fun and satisfying way to bring many plot points together and explode them. But I think it was also born of Rachel is at least 15 years younger than every guest there. And she's even before she realizes she's been given the cold shoulder and she's not supposed to be there, there's kind of this horror of her having to like her old lecturer is there and her lecturer's boyfriend is with her, and the boyfriend sort of quizzes Rachel to see how good a lecturer his girlfriend is. And it's really
horrifying.
And I suppose a lot of that, I mean, everyone has their own version of that in their head. And a lot of that for me is that, I'm frequently for a long time, I was frequently the youngest person in rooms. Like, I'm the baby of my family. I was young for my school year, and outside of school, I always had older friends. And even in London, people might not necessarily be older than you, but they're frequently from a different class. And basically in London, there are so many more ways to feel inadequate than you could even imagine. And we've all had that experience where, you've been at a dinner and you're like, not only am I not wanted here, I really, on a almost oil and water chemical bond level, don't belong here. And
I found the professional insecurity that she was feeling to be so recognizable. I can remember early on in my professoriate days being invited to a party that was largely attended by people at a much fancier university than I was at, and kind of being in these conversations that would end very suddenly, or the person would suddenly need a drink, and it often was when they found out that I was teaching at this other place. And I thought of Rachel in that moment, and how she so desperately wanted to see herself as possibly one day part of this kind of scene, and at the same time just feeling so deprived of any opportunity to actually exist there.
Oh, it's horrifying, isn't it? Being a person is horrifying.
It is, and then hell is other people, so what are you gonna do?
I know.
The question of abortion hangs over Rachel's story. because of the historical setting prior to the legalization of some kinds of abortion in Ireland, the only option for Rachel, should she decide to terminate the pregnancy, is a trip outside the country. Americans currently, as you know, are roiled with outrage and fear after the striking down of Roe versus Wade. And I wonder how you approach the question of reproductive rights in the novel from the Irish context.
It's so interesting that you bring up the Roe versus Wade thing, because the novel was acquired by Jenny Jackson, who's been on this podcast before.
That's right.
At Knopf. I just listened to her episode this afternoon. It was lovely. And she acquired the novel, and the following week, Roe was overturned, and
oh my goodness,
it was just this strange thing. I didn't know Jenny at all, and I just, other than having a couple of Skype meetings or Zoom meetings about the book, and it felt so strange. Obviously, it's I have no real part in it, but it felt like passing a baton in a way. In that, so I grew up constantly with the knowledge that if I were to get pregnant, and if I were to therefore need a termination, that I would have to go on this like difficult, expensive journey. And I don't think that was paranoid of me. I think every single woman in Ireland grows up with that. And
oh yeah.
And the thing is, I think there's this expectation that abortion rights only affects the people who need an abortion. But the reality is that the reality is that if you grow up in a place where abortion access is incredibly limited, it changes your relationship to your body and your relationship to sex and your relationship to men, and everything is hanged by this kind of cloak of fear comes over it, and everything is the domino effect mentally that leads back to pregnancy. And so therefore you are never carefree about your desire. And I feel like I probably have more sexual hang-ups than my London, not now, because, I'm very sort of happy in a very stable relationship, but I feel like I have more bats in the attic about that kind of stuff mentally in comparison to my peers who grew up in London or around it, just because of this one fact about the country I grew up in. And I don't think I'm alone in that. And I think it changes how men relate to women sexually. And I think so it's funny because we obviously, when we talk about the fight for abortion rights, we think about the moment in which someone needs an abortion and those months and those weeks in which she can get that termination. But no one talks that much about how it sort of goes into the soil of a culture sexually, And I hope this novel does that. I mean, it helps people understand that.
It does.
But this is something I said to Jenny back then, was that I look around now, and it's lots of my friends like to tell me about, like, Jesus, you picked a great time to be Irish. And I was like, I did. We are everywhere right now. We are everywhere in the arts. The country is more progressive than ever. Irish actor, and particularly Irish women, are everywhere,
It seems that way, yeah.
And when I was growing up, Irish people, contemporary living Irish people that people were interested in, it was like Colin Farrell and Damien Rice and men, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Like roguish, sexy men, and Irish women didn't really exist on any plane at all. I didn't know a single Irish woman sort of who was famous apart from Sinead O'Connor, who everyone hated so much that she killed herself. And like that, like she was, even when I was growing up, which should have still been the peak of her power, she was a national joke, which is how she was treated. People were unendingly cruel about her. And there was
I did not realize that at all.
Horribly
because
cruel.
It's so different in the US.
Yeah. Particularly in the last few years, once her conversion religiously, and the Irish press was awful about her. And even like someone like Dolores O'Riordan, who was in the Cranberries, who also, committed suicide, or Dolores O'Riordan, leading of the Cranberries, also somebody who couldn't do being an Irish woman and being famous. And then there was the chorus, I guess, who just sort of disappeared behind the veneer of sort of shiny hair and not really being themselves publicly. They weren't like Sharon Horgan or Aisling Bea or Sally Rooney or any of the many women you see.
Oh God, Sharon Horgan is such a gift to the world. I can't stop thinking about her and the Bad Sisters.
Oh my God, I know. And like Dairy Girls, I mean, there's so much stuff where it's just like Irish women yelling at you about how their lives are. And
I'm here for it.
I'm here for it, and I'm trust me, Chris, I'm cashing in.
Do it. Run with it.
Run with it, because the trend won't last. So anyway, I say that I think part of the reason why we're so forefront of the culture, it seems right now, is that we lived with this incredibly draconian set of reproductive rights. We overturned them, and when that happened in 2018, it was like this fury that unleashed, and like it's like we knew how powerful we were. We had fought for something for years and we had won, and it was like this burst of energy that just flooded out into the world and like made everyone bigger and brighter and smarter and stronger. And I guess I can only hope that happens in the US too,
I feel like we've already been made dumber and more cowardly and that it affects so many people's lives. And as you say, it's foundational. It's the soil. It's everyone. It's not just women. It's the men in their lives. It's their families. It's the relationships at the very beginning of the relationship before you've even had intimacy to the very end when you have to think about going elsewhere for an abortion. It, like so many other things in the US, it vastly over the burden goes to poor women of color first and foremost, and in more profound and immediate ways, people who can't travel. And and you explained so beautifully how you can come alive after that. But I feel like we sadly are in the the moment of the last bit of soil being thrown on top of the coffin of that progressive moment.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I really am. I just being an American right now, it seems, from speaking to friends anyway, it just, you must feel so helpless because the country used to feel so big and so powerful, and you used to feel like, if it seems like, agents of it, and now you're victims of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you would, whether this was true or not, you could look out onto the world and say, we're doing some things right. Even if you knew there was a longer, more complicated history with lots of bad things, you could say, we're making some choices and bending towards justice. And that just all feels flushed down the toilet by really a rather short period of time, which is always how it happens. Like history shows, you have these downturns that happen very quickly. But in any case, the way that, that history of Ireland that you're capturing there then contrasts with the present, and as you say, the everywhere-ness of the Irish woman is wonderful. I want to, so that we don't end on such a glum question.
No, I'm having a lovely time chatting, by the way. I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Oh, me too. I want to talk about the first book of your YA fantasy series, All Our Hidden Gifts, which happens to be one of my son's favorite books.
Oh,
I knew about that book well before I had this book on my radar, and I didn't know much about you other than that you were the author of that book. It's obviously clear the ways in which the fantasy genre diverges from so-called literary fiction, but I'm more interested in the similarities, and I'm wondering what kinds of overlap in the way you conceive of characters and the creative product that you find between your genres of writing.
So I still don't know. It's fascinating to me because I'm writing on a new YA book right now, which is not in the All Our Hidden Gifts series. It's a kind of a standalone thing set totally in a fantasy world. So my fantasy brain is working harder than it ever has. Like, it's an entire when you're inventing a new world, you have to do like entire systems of currency and religion and government, and it's such a huge mental task. And for me, it's weird. I don't really have any friends who do this as well. So apart from my friend Catherine Rundle, who she wrote a huge nonfiction book about John Donne that was a bestseller, and then she wrote a huge children's fantasy that was a bestseller. But she's also just an angel, so it's hard to relate.
Yeah, that's about as far on the outer edges of that spectrum that you could get.
Yeah. Whereas I'm like pretty successful as an adult novelist, and I'm pretty successful as an adult novelist. It's like, I'm kind of just making my way. I don't know. Like, all I can say is that, to go back to my first book again, which was a contemporary fiction novel that included a lot of like magical realism, very fairly, the critical response to that was like, she's a pretty good writer, I guess, but she really, what's going on kind of thing. And it was clear, like, it's looking back on that book, it's like somebody who's clearly extremely extremely interested in like office world politics and real world sort of like people in rooms talking and how those conversations don't go to plan and then what happens next kind of thing. And somebody who is just completely enthralled by the impossible and what the impossible tells us about the now. And how, I don't know, there's something about pushing something to its absolute limits that really thrills me. Like, for example, within the All Our Hidden Gifts series, there's a moment where these two girls are sitting on a bus and they realize there's a man who's watching them, and they're trying to figure out what to do about this guy who's watching them. And that's a very normal thing for teenage girls to go through, right? Is to be uncomfortable because they're getting unwanted attention from someone they don't understand. But then, in the All Our Hidden Gifts universe, that person is literally a threat, and he's following them, and he's from this sort of like magical terrorist organization that wants to, sap and kill them. And there's something really liberating to me about making all the internal paranoid, anxiety-driven fears of being a young woman and saying, you have every right to feel scared because the world is scary and look at them. But then also Julie being like, you have every right to feel powerful because look how powerful you are, and giving these girls like literally magical powers to fight them off. And there's something about that finding those two extremes of like, you are really this under threat and you are really this powerful. I find that very exciting. And it's particularly, I find, the writing of my YA and the writing of my adult novels, they really don't feel that different when I'm sitting down writing them, but it feels very different when I'm promoting them. Because when you're promoting...
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Because when you're promoting an adult novel, you essentially get to have lots of lovely conversations like this, Chris. It's like... You get like a lovely, intelligent person asking you thoughtful questions, and they have to listen to you forever. But when you're promoting a young adult novel, there is a legitimate public service aspect to it, because you're going to schools, you're working with charities, you're talking to often to kids who like, you're for example, you're there in their school because there's a sort of a grant system that means that every kid in that school got your book for free because the local library paid for it, because otherwise they wouldn't have a book, and you get to be on the coalface of that, and you get to be in communities, even if it's just for a day or a couple of days or a week if you're doing a teaching thing. And that's changed my life. And it's, Zadie Smith has this thing where she talks about she's not interested in being a writer unless she can be part of the commons, and writing young adult fiction, it's the most where I feel like part of the commons,
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that aspect of it, but that seems like it must be a wonderful and just community entwined way of being a writer. I like it very much.
Totally. And also nobody's interested in giving you a compliment, like, like even the kids who love your work are, and you in every classroom, you might get two who actually read it and who love it. And they just want to tell you about the thing they're writing, or they want to ask you questions about how you did it. They're not, they're not looking to impress you with a lovely question or a lovely compliment,
Mm. Well, and in that way, you do away with the artifice, and it's
Yeah.
really a much more natural thing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Although I love this. This feels very natural.
Before I let you go, I would love to know what you're reading recently and what you'd like to share with us and recommend from your own nightstand table.
Absolutely. So I did think I mentioned to you already. I just finished Tom Lake by Anne Patchett.
I'm dying to read this. I haven't had a chance yet, but I hear nothing but great things about it.
It is so wonderful, and it's such a good. This is so self-aggrandizing to be like, if you like my book, you might enjoy a little writer called Anne Patchett.
Do it.
But it's a kind of a more grown-up version of Rachel, let's say, it's this woman looking back on this very formative time in her very early 20s when it felt like her entire life was before her, and this extraordinary thing that happened and how it shaped her forever. Except this is set in the kind of early 80s, I think, and it's all in Summerstock Theatre in Michigan. What's actually lovely about that experience is I had it on Audible where Meryl Streep narrates it.
Meryl Streep, you're kidding me.
Right?
Way to go, Anne.
Way to go, Anne. I know. It's incredible. Way to go. What's great about it is that, like, because Meryl Streep is, like, obviously everyone knows her and loves her, but no, we don't really know that much about her other than, like, very spare biographical details. So because she's talking about being an actor in Summerstock Theatre in the early 80s, you can almost believe it's Meryl's story, even though you know it isn't,
Now I'm going to listen to it on audio.
Please do.
Can't be missed.
Yeah, no, it cannot be missed. So the other things I've been reading, I'm just starting tonight, actually. My partner is out, so I'm going to start Zadie Smith's new book. So that's going to be great, I think, because actually that story, the Titchfield claimant that's based on.
Yeah.
I just finished reading this book, which I really do recommend. I can't remember the author's name, but it's called Washington Black.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It's great. Yeah.
I just finished that. I got it from my local library. I loved it. And I'm really interested in that kind of period Victorian novel that's kind of these big, grand, sweeping adventures, Another one I read it for the first time this year, and I've had a hangover from it ever since, is Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell.
Oh, yeah, that's such a trippy Dickensian book.
Right? Like, yeah, I do sort of love that, people having their take on Dickens novels, even though I've never read Dickens at all. So, yeah, those are the big things right now in my head.
I love those. I'm about to read Fraud as well as Zadie Smith's one, and now I'm going to listen to Tom Lake.
Yeah,
sure. I've got to hear Meryl do it right. But I just can't recommend enough The Rachel Incident to my listeners. I think it's really an extraordinary book and a wonderful part of that long lineage of university adjacent, if not campus novels. And talking with you has been such a pleasure, Caroline.
I've loved it, Chris. This is one of my favorite interviews I've done. I really mean that.
That makes my heart grow 3 sizes. And I have had the wonderful opportunity to listen to Sentimental Garbage, and I want to recommend that as well. I think it won Cultural Podcast of the Year. Am I right in thinking that?
No.
No?
Well, it's fine that you think that. It's great that you think that. No, it won the Book Podcast of the Year at London Book Fair.
That's maybe even better. So please run out to your local indie and get a copy of The Rachel Incident, and then have a listen to Sentimental Garbage. And I hope we'll have a chance to talk again soon. Thank you so much. Well, that's all from me for now. A million thanks to the brilliant and hilarious Caroline O'Donoghue for a wide-ranging and absorbing conversation about all things, but especially her latest novel, The Rachel Incident. Make sure to listen to her wonderful and side-splittingly funny podcast, Sentimental Garbage, if you happen to care even a little bit about culture, the high and the lowly. You can find links to purchase The Rachel Incident and all of Caroline's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.